It's time for this week's episode of Brandon Sports Talk, featuring in-depth interviews from those who are trending in the world of athletics. And now, here's the host of Brandon Sports Talk, Brandon Pate.
Welcome back to Brandon Sports Talk. In today's episode, I have the privilege to interview the two business owners of a sports podcast called Double Down Sports. How are you doing today?
We're good. Appreciate you having us on, Brandon.
Yeah, thank you again for the opportunity.
You're welcome. Noah, can you talk about how y'all got started in with the sports podcast?
Yeah, so both Alec Romero and myself, we went to college together at Sacramento State. We were both part of the radio station program. It's called KSSU over there. That was a call sign. And we got to do a lot of shows together. We collaborated on shows. We also did quite a few sports broadcasting games. My second year with the radio station, I was the sports director. So we got to broadcast some of the sports football games, the home basketball games, some of the home baseball and softball games as well together. So we just had that kind of chemistry going in. A few years later, after we both graduated, kind of reconnected. And just due to the pandemic, a lot of us had more time. And we just had the idea to start a sports podcast, kind of continue where we left off when we were both in college. But with the free time, it's gone pretty smoothly. And we just wanted to, I guess, we both have a love for sports. We both miss talking about sports. We would text each other during March Madness and other big sporting events like that. So we just decided to put our heads together and get back to it,
Alec, can you talk about how you came up with the name Double Down Sport?
So it's actually a funny story. That's kind of a collaboration between our college shows that we had at KSSU. Mine was the weekly sports report, and then Noah was double coverage. It was double coverage. Yeah. And then we were kind of just thinking about how can we combine those two together. So that's where the word Double Down Sports came in. Because toward our second semester at Sacramento State, when we were at KSSU, we actually aligned our shows together to be in back-to-back hours. So it kind of became, we called it like the double sports report. And then we had another colleague here, which we'll definitely have him listen in. His name is Jacob Banshaw, and his show was called The Buzz. So our sports show was called the Weekly Double Buzz. So it was kind of like a best damn sports show period type of feel. We were just laughing the whole time, had a lot of fun, and that was definitely memorable and got us into the position we are today.
That's wonderful. Noah, what kind of segments do you have on the Double Down tape?
So we like to start off the show with just like some friendly banter, kind of talk about what's like relevant with our teams. Specifically, if we're starting to make like some friendly wagers, nothing like too serious, but we're both fans of different teams. And I know like the last episode, the Panthers play the Chargers. My team's the Carolina Panthers. His NFL team's the Los Angeles Chargers now. And so we made a little friendly wager. We like to talk about whatever we did the past few weeks or whatever, because we do record every other week. So we just like to catch up. And then we talk about three main topics in the sports world within those 2 weeks that we recorded the previous episode. And then at the end, we do save down the end for like a double down segment, which is where we ask each other kind of questions where we either can double down or not double down on, which is kind of like, are you willing to like put your money on the line in that kind of sense, and kind of give some hot takes, but also kind of elaborate on different things that we may have missed in our three main topics. But that way we can kind of hit on some of the more intriguing parts of the sports world while also giving like some of our hot takes at the end, like some of the juicy stuff that the listeners like to hear.
That's wonderful that you came up with the name Double Down, a segment called that. Mm-hmm. Alec, what is some of the topics that you cover in the podcasts?
So the week of, I'll stay pretty up to date with what's going on in the news, and also listen to the mainstream sports radio of ESPN and Fox Sports, and make sure that we're kind of shying away. We want to make sure that when people are tuning into our show, that it's a little bit different. So we actually got into the weeds of high school sports one time, how the pandemic is affecting high school to youth sports in the urban areas. We also talked about some political movements, especially during the time when the NBA was in the shutdown, and then also Georgetown coach John Thompson passed away. That was a little bit of a different episode that kind of shied away. It still involves sports, but I think it definitely showed. It kind of looped in of the Black Lives Matter movement. So we have a pretty good variety. I'd say some is pretty mainstream, but we also want to make sure that, you can't tune in to the local radio and hear the same thing that we're talking about.
Noah, who are some of the people that you've interviewed in the past?
So for the Double Down Sports podcast, we haven't had the chance to interview anybody yet. We still kind of want to build our fan base. We're still relatively new within our first 10 episodes of the show. But in the past, both of us also interned at the State Hornet, which was the on-campus school newspaper at Sacramento State. So in that experience, we both got to interview a lot of players and coaches that were in the athletic departments over there at Sac State, basketball players, soccer players, softball players, you name it. And then definitely I've had the opportunity to reach out and just do different internships and do different, websites that I've written for. And I have a few other podcasts that I've started as well. I've gotten to interview just different athletes. I got to attend the Pac-12, what do they call the Pac-12 Media Days last year in 2019. So I've had the chance to interview people like Herm Edwards and Mike Leach, and a few other Pac-12 players that were there that year. And just, with the other podcasts and stuff, I kind of like to keep it local and highlight local, like business owners, success stories, people who own brands, people who make music, people who are running for like city council and that kind of stuff. I like to keep that other podcast to highlight the local success stories, but that's kind of like the gist of who we've interviewed in the past. A lot of sports, but also trying to branch out from sports too.
Alec, what have you learned that you didn't know before you started the podcast?
That there is definitely a lot of work that goes into it. Noah, how actually we started this, aside from our connection at KSSU and kind of staying in touch throughout these last couple of years, Noah has another podcast that he is a solo host of, but he has guests on every single week called My Mike and I. And he actually had me on as a guest. And that was pretty straightforward. I came up with the agenda and then we talked about it, but then once we started Double Down Sports, I think we really got into the weeds of, hey, you have to market your podcast a certain way. If you want to make a little bit of money here and there, you have to put your website here. Not everybody just uses Spotify and Apple. So a lot of work goes into it. It's a part-time unpaid job. You're definitely putting in 10, 15 hours a week to have a quality podcast, because if not, I think people can understand if you're just kind of going about it. I don't want to use foul language on your podcast, but I think people will realize that, stop tuning in. But if we improve throughout our time, I think people will recognize that and our viewership will grow from there.
Noah, what are some of your future plans for the Double Down podcast?
So continuing to be innovative. I know we started the Double Down segment at the end of the show, but we do want to come up with some other segments. Like Alec mentioned earlier, kind of incorporate more of a local scene, high school, especially both of us. We're in two different parts of California right now. So we both want to kind of cover high school football, at least the main talking points as far as like local high school athletes, where they may be committed to. Obviously, like when the season rolls around, if it does get to roll around, with COVID and everything kind of going on, the schedule's all over the place right now. But, kind of highlight some of the local high school talented athletes and teams. But also we do want to start interviewing some, hopefully some athletes, some coaches, maybe on a local level too, start with community college, high schools, and eventually work our way up to like some of the professional athletes that are willing to be on our show. But those are some of the future plans that we have for Double Down Sports.
Alec, what advice would you give upcoming future sports talk podcasts?
I think definitely find a co-host with the same type of passion that you have, someone who is up to date with sports, someone who is a bit sports fan, someone you can do the friendly wagers with and make your podcast interesting. And also, if you don't have the experience, make sure that maybe they have a little bit of experience, because if you guys are starting off with not knowing how to use Anchor, not knowing how to edit a podcast, it's going to take a little while to get off the ground. So if you're someone like myself who just wanted to start off, I was fortunate enough to be in connection with someone like Noah, who already kind of knew the podcast business and how to get things going. So definitely seek out, but also don't be afraid to put yourself out on Twitter. You might make a new friend, a new partner for years to come.
Noah, do you have any advice for future sports talk podcasts?
Yeah, definitely try and branch out and do a little bit outside the norm. Take chances, kind of be a little risky, because I think sometimes if you want to start a sports podcast, the simple thing is like, oh, let's try and be like the ESPN personalities or the Fox Sports personalities, whatever, shows that are really popular that people like to watch in the morning or afternoons, or even on their local radio show. But if you try and sound like someone else, whether it's you doing it solo or you have a co-host or it's a team, maybe 3 or 4 people, just try and do something different. Try and be a little bit innovative, because chances are if you're copying what the mainstream ESPN, Fox Sports people are doing, there's already, hundreds and thousands of other people. So it's a very competitive industry. I think if you really want to stand out in the sports industry and really get your podcast somewhere further, or even if, it's not a podcast, something different like a YouTube channel, you definitely want to kind of get different opinions on there, try different segments, just get really creative and innovative and do something away from the norm. That way you really stand out to new listeners and be like, hey, like we can come to them and not hear the same mumbo jumbo that's on the main networks already.
Where can my listeners find your podcast at on social media?
So for social media, we are on Instagram and Twitter, and we always end our episode with this. It's at DBLE Down Sports. We normally we're starting to get a little more active on Twitter. We don't have too many tweets just yet, but once we get a little more episodes, we'll have some trivia, maybe do a little bit of giveaways here and there. So one more time, it's at DBLE Down Sports, and you can find us on Twitter and Instagram.
Are you on any other podcast platforms?
So through Anchor, you can definitely find us on the quote unquote mainstream sites such as Spotify and you can click our link directly to go to Apple Podcasts. And one more time, that's at DBLE Down Sports.
Thank you again for your interview, and best of luck to both of y'all in Double Down Sports.
Thank you, Brandon. We appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you, Brandon. Really appreciate the opportunity.
You're welcome. You can find Brandon Sports Talk on Facebook at Brandon Sports Talk, Instagram at Brandon Sports Talk, Twitter at Talk_Brandon, and you can find me on YouTube at Brandon Sports Talk. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. Thank you again for your interview, and best of luck.
You've been watching Brandon Sports Talk. Please feel free to like, share, and subscribe to Brandon Sports Talk on social media and on YouTube.